Next is X-linked inheritance, and specifically we're looking at X-linked inheritance of recessive disorders. So in a recessive disorder that's an X carried disorder, a female is going to be affected with the disorder only if she has two or both abnormal X chromosomes. Because the female has two X chromosomes normally, as long as one of them is normal, if it's a recessive disorder, she's not going to be affected with that disorder. Now, if she has two abnormal X chromosomes, then she does have the disorder. If she has one normal X chromosome and one abnormal X chromosome, then she's considered to be a carrier because she could pass on that defective X chromosome to one of her offspring. So she may not have the disease, but she is carrying it. For a male, he only has one X chromosome normally, so if that one X chromosome is abnormal, then he's got the disease. He can't really carry it because he's only got the one chromosome, and that's going to be the one that expresses itself in his phenotype. Color blindness is the example of the X-linked recessive disorder that we're going to look at right now. For females, there are three possible genotypes for color blindness, and so in this example, we're using the N, the superscript N, to indicate if these are normal X chromosomes or abnormal X chromosomes. So if it's an uppercase N, then that would be considered a normal X chromosome. So for a female, she could have two normal X chromosomes, and she would be considered phenotypically normal. She could have one normal X chromosome and one abnormal X chromosome, demonstrated here by the lowercase n superscript. It will be considered a carrier. If she has two abnormal X chromosomes, then she herself would be colorblind. For males, you've only got two genotypes, which means there's only the two phenotypes. Either they're normal or they're colorblind. Either they have a normal X chromosome in combination with their Y, or they have an abnormal X chromosome in combination with the Y and they're considered colorblind. We're looking at this pedigree where you're given some genotypes and you're having to fill in the rest. And I just want to remind you that when we're talking about crosses with X and Y for a Punnett square, you end up with two females and two males in the Punnett square when you're looking at the X and Y chromosomes. And we'll get back to that in just a second. Alright, so looking at this pedigree, the first question is, what are the possible parental genotypes of the F1 generation? Well, the parental genotypes of the F1 generation would be the P1 generation. So this line up here, these are the parents of the F1 generation. Let's look at the male of the F1 generation first. So this male has an abnormal X chromosome and a normal Y chromosome. We are given the genotype of his father, which is a normal X chromosome and a normal Y chromosome. Well, we know that this Y chromosome had to come from the father because there is no Y chromosome in the mother to donate to the son. So the Y chromosome that the son has came directly from the father. So we know that that takes care of one of the alleles. The other allele is this abnormal X chromosome. He had to have gotten that from his mother, so we know that she has to have at least one abnormal X chromosome. But what we don't know is, does she have one abnormal X chromosome and one normal one, or does she have two abnormal ones? So either of those genotypes would work in this pedigree. So when we write down for the paternal grandmother, we have two different options. We have two abnormal X chromosomes, which means that she herself would be colorblind. Or we have a normal X chromosome and an abnormal X chromosome, which means she would be considered a carrier. Alright, now let's look at the mother. So the female of the F1 generation, we know that she has one normal X chromosome and one abnormal X chromosome. Her parents, the P1 generation, were given her mother's genotype, but not her father's. Well, we know that one of these X's that she got came from her mom, and one X came from her dad. So looking at these X's, we've got a normal one and an abnormal one. Well, her mother only has normal X chromosomes to donate, to pass on. So we know that this X chromosome that is normal, with the uppercase N, must have come from her mother because that's all she's got to donate, which means the abnormal one must have come from her father. So we know her father's genotype would be the abnormal X chromosome that we just said that she inherited from her father, and then a normal Y chromosome. So he would be considered colorblind because he's got an abnormal X but a normal Y. Now let's look at the children. So looking at the children between this cross, the first thing to keep in mind or to remember is, just like we said with this Punnett square, we're going to have 2 females and we're going to have 2 males. For the females, they get 1 X from their mom and 1 X from their dad. For the males, they get an X from their mom and a Y from their dad. So let's look down here. So child 1, we know child 1 is a male, which means that he got an X from his mom and a Y from his dad. So the Y is normal because that has nothing to do with color blindness, but he could have gotten either of these 2 X's. So let's start with the first X. Let's give him the normal X. So if we do child 1 as having a normal X and a Y, so we got the normal X from his mom and the normal Y from his dad, then that would make him normal. Child 2 is a female, so that means she got an X chromosome from her dad and an X chromosome from her mom. So there's only one option for the X chromosome from her dad, and that's the abnormal one. From her mom, it could be either one. So for this first daughter, we'll pick the very first X chromosome, which is normal. So for child 2, she has that abnormal X from her dad and the normal X from her mom. Which means she's going to be considered a carrier. She doesn't actually have the disease. She's not colorblind herself, but she does carry the abnormal X chromosome. Now, let's look at child 3. Child 3 is male, which means he gets the Y from his dad and an X from his mom. Well, we already used up that first X with the first son, which means the second son is going to have to get that second X chromosome. So if that's the case, that's the abnormal X chromosome, which means that he's going to have color blindness because he's going to have 1 abnormal X chromosome and then his normal Y chromosome. So he is going to be colorblind because we're doing a Punnett square just like this. It's just instead of normal X's and Y's, we've got an abnormal X up here and we've got 1 normal and 1 abnormal X down here. So looking at the 4th child, or the last option, it's going to be a female. She's going to get an X from each parent. So she's going to get the abnormal X from the dad, and then she's going to be the unlucky one that gets the abnormal X from the mom, the second X chromosome. So she is going to have 2 abnormal X chromosomes. Which means that she is going to be colorblind. So out of the 4 offspring of this colorblind man and a carrier woman for F1, the F2 generation, we've got 1 normal child, 1 carrier, and 2 colorblind children. So when we're talking about percentages of the F2 generation, we just had 1 normal one, so 25% were normal. We had 1 carrier, so 25% were carriers. And then we had 2 colorblind children, so 50%, or half, were colorblind.